Hello, you little YouTubers. Here is your friend, Velma Hagar, with her coffee in hand. In her house, her nice, cool house, and it's 117 degrees outside. I pray that this electricity hangs in there. I love the desert, but I'm going to tell you what, Mamma mia. I've been up at the mountain, up at Big Bear. My daughter has a lovely little cottage up there, and we were up at the cottage, and it was very cool. Guido and I went up there. We spent the whole time out on her deck. We hardly went in the house except to sleep. So anyway, here I am back to the desert. And as you know, I do love the desert. I will never complain even about the heat. But anyway, got my legs up here. I'm all comfy because I'm going to tell you a story today. I'm a storyteller at heart. I love to tell stories, and I have a lot of them. One of the beautiful things about getting older is that you accumulate all kinds of stories that interest people, that have an effect on life. And as such, at 80, I'm almost 81, you guys. And I have tons of stories. And you guys like it when I tell them. I get more hits when I tell a story, especially when it's about our childhood. As you know, I'm Sammy Hagar's sister, and therefore, what I'm telling you about me is about him too. And I know you guys love to hear him, even if you don't love to hear me. But I'm the one that gets to tell it to you, all right? Now, before we do another thing, I want you to subscribe. Hit subscribe, would you please? And if you have already subscribed, please get a friend too. I'm almost to 1,000. I have been chugging along for years to get to 1,000. Good God, what is this? And buy my doggone book too. Hidden Treasures in Dark Places and Hidden Treasures in Secret Places. Now, with that said, I'm going to get on with my story. Here's looking at you, kid. When we were young, as you know, we had an amazing mother, even though we also had about as amazing as my mother was about as bad as our dad was. But honestly, you guys, let me tell you something. God always makes up to you for what you've lost if you take the time to notice. I think I need to set up a little bit here. I look a little low. And I'll tell you what, God made it up to us. What my dad was, everything my dad wasn't, my mother was. And as you all know, I'm extremely into the Lord, into prayer, into faith. And I got that from my mother. And all of us, all four of us kids that my mother had, she taught us so well. And the story I want to tell you today was one she told me years ago. And my friend and I, Lila, my best friend and I, we remind each other of this story over and over and over throughout our lives. My dad was a chronic alcoholic, as most of you know. My mother was in a very bad position. He was physically and verbally abusive to her, sexually abusive to her. And we were in a predicament. She didn't have any education. She didn't know how to work and provide for her kids if she did leave him. When she would try to leave him, he would always find us. And when he found us, he would always be so humble and pitiful and talk us into going home. And we'd go back home and he would start all over again. So it was a vicious cycle of psychotic drunkenness and fear and just all I can tell you is I was in constant fear of my dad killing my mother. And I know that she even had more fear than we did. She had 4 children, and she didn't know how to take care of us unless she stayed home with him. Hey, Google, volume down. And so she told us this story after all was over, and in her latter years, we used to tell her she went from the outhouse to the penthouse because she literally did. I mean, we lived in such squalor. And then in the end, she lived up here with me at Ironwood Country Club. And she really made it right to the top, And so that was always our line from her, from the outhouse to the penthouse. And it fit her so well. And honestly, I think we should give that line to Sammy too. He has also gone from the outhouse to the penthouse, as have I. I always say I went from rags to riches. And if you haven't watched my video, From Rags to Riches, pull it up. Just put Velma Hagar in the Google line, or go into YouTube and then say Velma Hagar, From Rags to Riches. It tells the whole story. This is just a little portion. Okay, so Mother said that she always felt like this wall was in front of her. She just didn't know what to do next. She said she would just feel so hopeless. The feeling was so hopeless. And she had a very strong faith. She didn't read the Bible. She didn't know what the Bible said. All she got of the Bible was at church. We went to Catholic church, and they only gave the gospel. It was always a very quiet service. You know how, I don't know what Catholic church does today, but in those days, much of it was done in Latin, and they would say every service they'd say the gospel. When they said that they're going to read the gospel, we'd all stand up, and they would read just a short little thing out of the Bible. So she knew a little bit, but I'll tell you one thing: she had childlike faith that was amazing. This childlike faith that she passed on to all of us, and I latched onto that because I was in such fear all my life. And her faith was beautiful. So back to my story. So she said this one day, she was walking down Sierra Boulevard, which was in Fontana, where we were at the time. And she said, I felt this hopelessness. And she said it was raining and she had an umbrella. And she said, I just felt like there was a block wall in front of me and I couldn't move. And then when she was telling us the story, she said, and then one day the wall was gone. It was just gone. And Lila and I have always loved that line. We'd say, and then the wall was gone. And it reminds me of Joshua and Jericho. How Joshua comes to Jericho and there's a big wall around the city. And as children, we all learned that little song that we sang about Joshua and the wall, of Jericho. And the walls of Jericho came tumbling down, And Jericho was a city that was forbidden to Joshua, and he needed to get in there for whatever reason. And God gave him some specific instructions that had to do with prayer and fasting and marching around the building. And Joshua simply did what God told him to do. As stupid as it may have sounded to other people, march around a building and pray and, 7 times on the 7th day and blow the horns. And there was all kinds of a formula that God gave to Joshua that day to get the walls to fall down. And one day the walls fell down. Now, what I want to say is walls are built brick by brick. It isn't like all of a sudden a wall is in front of you. There are things that created that wall. Things like fear, doubt, anger, hurt, sin of all kinds. Every time you do something against God, you put another brick in that wall. And then one day the wall, and sometimes other people put the wall in front of you, as it did in my mother's case. But the wall is still there. And consequences to things that you do and say, put a brick in your wall. Whatever it is that caused that wall to be built in your life, the only way to get it down is prayer. The only way is trusting God and prayer. And if you don't do what God says to do, that wall is going to stay there the rest of your life. And not only that, it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue as you add bricks to it. It gets bigger and bigger. So I want to say to you today, trust God with all your heart. You don't have to be a scholar of the Bible. You don't have to be, very intelligent. You don't have to know a lot. You have to do what you know is right. Just do what you know is right as you look to God and ask Him to remove your wall. And one day, your wall will be gone. Stand strong, trust God, pray, and one day your wall will be gone too. Don't you love it? I love that story. I love that story. Mama Hagar, she taught us beautifully. She taught us as a child. She taught us so simply, trust God. We're going to be okay. God's going to take care of us. Those words, they ring in my mind 81 years later. That's how my mom taught us about God. Trust God. We're going to be okay. She looked to Him. She trusted Him. Mama Hagar. And this Mama Hagar wants to do the same thing for you. Trust God. Look to Him. Pray and ask Him to remove that wall that's in front of you right now. All right? Leave me a little note below. Tell me about your wall, and I'll help you pray for it. All right? I love you guys. I got a little sentimental today. No laughter today. This was not funny. This wasn't laughing stuff. Yes, it is. Laughter's the best medicine. All right? I love you guys with all my heart. Until next time, this is your Bubby saying, here's looking at you, kid. Velma Hagar, bidding you a blessed day. Bye.